I see some familiar faces, and this is so great. I love Zoom. I'm a big fan of Zoom because we get to do this beyond Nashville, beyond wherever we are. Thank you all for being here. And thank you so much to the Japan American Society of Tennessee, JAST. JAST is a wonderful community for someone like me who moved to Nashville and wanted to meet other people who were Japanese, but also interested in Japan and Japanese culture. And JAST very generously, when I suggested doing this book club, allowed me to just have this space and have this platform and to connect with all of you. And last time, some of you, I think, joined our Between the Lines with JAST when we discussed How Do You Live by Genzaburo Yoshino. That is a book from the 1930s that is currently being adapted into Hayao Miyazaki's next animated film. It's very exciting. We had a great discussion about that. But after that event was held, an editor at the Japan Times reached out and said, hey, do you want to just write a book review about this for us? I've been dying to have someone write about this, and you already discussed it with this organization. And so JAST actually opened that door, professional door for me. And I'm just so grateful for that, and grateful for JAST allowing me to do this all over again. And again, tonight we will be discussing a more contemporary book. And I think that in our future sessions, I'll kind of rotate between contemporary, classic, female, male. Like I want to try to diversify our reading list of Japanese literature. And so every time you log on and come here and see me, we will be discussing a totally different book. And that's part of the fun. But alas, thank you. Thank you, JAST. Thank you, everybody. Quick note, I like to design my courses and this kind of interactive discussions for people who have read the book beforehand, but also for those who have not. I like to talk with adults with full-time jobs who are busy and have other passions. I do not want to just speak to a bunch of people who also have read the book twice over and have made margin notes. I mean, that can be interesting too, but I really like talking with people who are kind of coming at it fresh. So if you are someone who just picked up this book and are only at the first few pages, please don't feel bad. This is designed in a way so that I am going to go through all of the excerpts and we can look at the text together and talk about whatever we notice in that excerpt. And if you find this hour intriguing and it motivates you to keep reading, great. I would love for you to read the entire book. Even if you don't have the book in front of you, I hope that you can enjoy this hour. All right, so before we dive into some of the excerpts, I would like to do a brief overview of the book and author. Before I begin, any kind of quick questions about what to expect tonight? Oh, and feel free to unmute yourself and speak. I might not be able to see your hand being raised. All right, I think we're all good. You can also feel free to use the chat. I am a big fan of that too. All right, Scattered All Over the Earth by Yoko Tawada. The English translation looks like this. It's a beautiful cover. In Japanese, the title is Chikyu ni chiribamerarete. For those studying Japanese, chikyu is earth, chiribamerarete. The translation of that here is scattered. Yoko Tawada. Who is Yoko Tawada? Okay. She was born in 1960 in Tokyo. Her father was a translator and a bookseller. And perhaps because of that influence, she majored in Russian literature while studying at Waseda University. And after college, she moved to Hamburg, Germany, where she worked with her father's book distribution business. And then that got her wanting to stay in Germany. So she went to Hamburg University and got a master's degree in German literature. So now she has both Russian literature and German literature. After graduating with a master's, she went to live in Zurich in Switzerland to get her PhD in German literature. And after that, she returned to Germany in Berlin. She has called Berlin her home since 2006. And she has written books in both Japanese and German. This is the incredible thing about her. She is a multilingual scholar and writer, and she is also fluent in English. She has written over 15 novels and novellas and has cited Franz Kafka as an important influence. I want to show you some covers of other books she's written. This one is called The Bridegroom Was a Dog. Very, very short, kind of like a short story, super readable, very steamy. This Yoko Tawada loves to work with fantastical premises. She likes to borrow from fairy tale like premises or things that are just really, really surreal. Again, like thinking kind of like Kafka. This book is about a woman who falls in love with a man who may or may not be a dog. So it's all about, but even, you know, once you get kind of past that premise, it's also about Japanese, being a woman in Japan and what sexuality means and what it's like for a woman to kind of break out of that. Very interesting. Another book she wrote, Memoirs of a Polar Bear. This is interesting. She wrote this originally in German. The English translation is available now. And this is a book about a talking polar bear who lives in Soviet Union, East Germany. And she ends up writing a best-selling memoir and goes on a book tour. Talking polar bear, Soviet Union. It's like a lot of things at once. But again, she just uses these kind of like far out premises and then quickly dives into kind of cultural critiques or humor. She makes it really easy for readers to kind of enter these fantastical worlds. And her novels are just so fascinating, scattered all over the earth. This is her latest book. This was published in 2018 in Japan, and the English translation came out this year in 2022. So this is very, very recent, and it's the first in a trilogy. I personally cannot wait for the second and third books to come out. As soon as they are out, I will be there to get my copy. And so this one, just like the others, has a fantastical premise, which is Japan no longer exists. You all know this from looking at the description of this event, I'm sure. But I can sort of talk a little bit about what that means in this book. I also wanted to share, not to be super like narcissist, but I wrote about this book in a personal essay. I'm going to share it in the chat. No pressure, but in case you're interested in sort of a more personal take on what this book meant for someone like me who is an international person, feel free to read that. I would love for you to, you know, I could talk about this book for more than this hour. So, you know, me sharing you this link, that's just my way of saying, okay, if you want to hear more rambles about this, just read that piece. But tonight we're just going to talk more really about this book, not so much about me. Okay, so before we do the overview so far. Okay. All right. I am going to share my screen. Let's see if this works. Okay. Before we do the excerpt, can you all see this diagram? Okay. I am not a technology person. I made this with Microsoft Word, but I had fun doing it. There's 6 main characters, and I really wanted to show you all who these 6 people are, why we're going to talk about them, how they're related to each other. And I thought the best way to do it, I'm not an artistic person, so I use stick figures, but I think that it kind of works for this context. You can also see that the sizes are inconsistent. That's on purpose. Hideko is described in the book as a petite woman, and Akash is described as kind of tall. So, you know, I try to kind of, anyway, let me just tell you about these characters. All right. In this fictional universe, Japan no longer exists. The details of this are actually unclear, but it's implied that the country physically sunk due to a climate event. So this takes place kind of in the future, and Japan has not existed for a little while. Now, it follows 6 individuals. Let's start here with Hideko, one of the main characters. She is from Japan. She studied abroad in Sweden, moved to Norway, and then Denmark. And it's at that point that she learned that Japan doesn't exist anymore. And so she kind of gets stuck there. She's a bit of a climate refugee. And she studied abroad in Sweden and all these places to study languages. She's kind of a linguistic nut. And so she stays in Denmark And she really enjoys these Scandinavian cultures and languages. And she ends up taking this job at a nonprofit for immigrant children to kind of settle in. And so a lot of the kids that she interacts with are refugees from places like Afghanistan. And so she's, you know, even in this fantastical kind of premise, Yoko Tawada is kind of borrowing from real current events. So Hideko is in Denmark. Second character, Knut. Knut is actually the perspective that we start with. This novel is broken up. Each chapter is written from the perspective of a different character. So throughout the novel, you're going to get to know all of these 6 characters very intimately. And so we actually start with Knut. He is a linguistics student at Copenhagen University in Denmark. And he is kind of just lounging in his house, watching TV, when he happens to see this program about people whose countries have disappeared. Other people on this panel are someone from Yugoslavia, former Soviet Union. There's another person from, I forget, there's another country that no longer exists, but then Hideko is there as well. And Knut is just immediately mesmerized by her because she is speaking a language that is so interesting to him, but he's never really heard it before. And so being a linguistics student and a linguistics nut himself, he's just like, I got to talk to this woman who's also interested in languages and seems to be speaking a language I've never heard. And so they meet and they're immediately kind of smitten over each other. And Hideko, her yearning ever since Japan has disappeared is to find another person who can speak Japanese with her. And so Knut, you know, already having this attraction for her, says, I'm going to help you. We're going to look at that excerpt later, but let's move on to the third character, Akash. When they're on their way to another place, when Hideko and Knut are already traveling, they happen to be on a bus together with Akash from India. And they are a gender non-conforming individual, born male, but dresses in saris and likes to go as a, you know, live as a woman, but also kind of gender fluid and explores that a lot. When, you know, you get into their perspective, you get more of that kind of straddling the 2 gender identities. Akash from India now lives in Germany, and their job is to guide other international students from India around Germany to help them settle in. And so now these 3, the top 3, are together on a bus headed to Trier. And why are they headed to Trier, Germany, out of all places? Well, it's because there's a dashi festival going on. And Hideko thinks, well, surely there's someone from Japan at the dashi festival. And that's where they meet Nora. Nora is a white woman living in Germany, and she organized this festival for her boyfriend, Tenzo. She is so head over heels in love with this man named Tenzo. And he is a sushi chef and dashi master. And she created this event for him so that he could show off his skills and, you know, be appreciated. What really happens here, and I am going to kind of give away something a little bit big, but I promise you will still enjoy this book. Tenzo happens to not be Japanese at all. He gets mistaken as Japanese by Nora and just never corrects her. He is indeed Nanook from Greenland. He is Inuit. He is an international student as well and worked at a sushi restaurant as a part-time job. And that's, oh, go ahead.
Is it too far away?
Oh.
Did you get a call?
I think somebody might be, I need to ask to mute. If you do have a comment or question, feel free to unmute and speak, but I think that might have been an accident right there. That's okay. So I'm just going to keep blabbering on for just a little bit, and then I promise I'll open it up to more interactive discussion. But Tenzo / Nanook is the 5th character we meet, and he got mistaken as being Japanese by Nora and kind of went along with it. But when she organized this whole dashi festival, he thought, oh my gosh, like this lie has just gone on a little too far. I need to get out of here. And so he gives some sort of excuse and escapes to Norway. He tells her that he's going back to Norway, but he doesn't tell her why. And so now we have these three characters, Hiroko, Kanet, Akash. They're all in Trier for this festival that got canceled. And Nora, who's devastated and has no idea what happened to Tenzo, says, I'm just going to go look for Tenzo. I'm going to go to Norway. Do you want to come with me? And so now the four of them, Hiroko, Kanet, Akash, Nora, they all travel together to Norway to try to meet Tenzo. When they get there, of course, the curtain is lifted. And that's when something very interesting happens. And we'll take a look at the excerpt there. But, still throughout all this time, Hiroko still has not found someone who can speak Japanese with her. And so Tenzo / Nanook says, I'm going to help you. I know someone who used to work at the sushi restaurant that I worked at. I've never met him in person myself, but I heard there was a Japanese person named Susano, and he currently lives in Arles, France. And so the five of them determined, they go, okay, let's go. Let's all go. And so that's kind of how the book is structured. And I don't know if I mentioned this yet, but in structure, this book is actually, even though it's so contemporary and so fantastical and modern, it also follows the structure kind of the Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, which is one of the oldest novels ever written in humanity. And for those English literature nerds out there, I hope that you can find those parallels interesting as you read. And that's kind of the big overview. Before I go to look at some excerpts, I kind of want to open it up to the room, to the virtual room. Does anybody have any sort of questions or thoughts or immediate reactions to learning about this novel and the overview? Feel free to unmute and speak if you do. Maybe you'll have more questions as we read the excerpts too.
I'll dive in. Thanks for doing this, Yurina. I really appreciate it. I'm not that far into the book, but really enjoying it. So don't mind the spoilers. And I'm really curious. What I've noticed in the beginning is that, as far as I can tell, they haven't yet named her language as Japan or Japanese.
Right.
Yet she's very specific about Danish and Finnish and German, yet there has not yet been a mention to Japan or Japanese, just her home language, her home country. Does that ever change, or are you going to speak to that significance? Or I just find that really fascinating.
That is such a good observation. Thank you so much for pointing that out. Yes, that is something that stays consistent, actually. It's kind of sneaky the way Yoko Tawada does it. You're right. She keeps saying like, from my home country, or from, they say like when there's a misunderstanding about sushi, she'll say, oh, that's not Finnish, that's from my country. And it's kind of implied that everybody in the room understands it's Japanese. I think that, and this is just my theory, but because this is a futuristic world in which Japan no longer exists, and now I'm also thinking Yoko Tawada wrote another book called The Emissary. And in The Emissary, that's another kind of sci-fi premise where it's the old people who live and thrive and are energetic, and it's the children who grow ill. That one's a little bit more of a pessimistic kind of book. It's also very interesting. But in that world, the Japanese government has kind of like censored a lot of words in Japanese society. And that's kind of another point of the book. I'm wondering if maybe she's borrowing a little bit of that here, and the fact that Japan has disappeared, maybe this is just my guess, that it's a little bit taboo now to say Japan or Japanese too directly. But that would be my best guess, having read her other books, but that's a great observation.
Thanks.
Any other thoughts or questions? All right. If you'd like this PDF, let me know. I'm happy to share it, or maybe Peyton or someone at JAST can help kind of connect me to you. But I can kind of keep going back and forth like this between the character list and the excerpt, but just know that that is a reference for you. I am going to start sharing some excerpts. And oh, good. Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to start reading some excerpts. I would love to obsess over every single page and paragraph, but of course we have limited time. There's 3 things about this book that I want to discuss with all of you. The first one is Hiruko's made-up language, which she calls Panska, and that's kind of like why Kuna is so interested in her, is because of this language that she created. We can talk a little bit about that. The second thing I want to talk about is just to introduce to you some of these very interesting, colorful characters, an excerpt from Akash's perspective and then Tenzo's perspective. And then perhaps 1 or 2 quotes about the mother tongue and the kind of importance that we as a society place on mother tongues, and what this book does to kind of turn that on its head. And then at the end, I do want to leave some time open for general questions and thoughts. So we'll just kind of go through these excerpts a little, just little by little. And if you are interested in kind of diving into it more, please feel free to read the whole book and reach out to me after, and I'd be happy to just like talk your ear off for hours and hours. All right, so first of all, page 12, if you have the physical book, you can also see from the PDF the page number at the top, but we're going to start with page 12. This is when Kunut first interacts with Hiruko for the first time. I just kind of want to show you how interesting it is in the Yoko Tawada's text, as well as the way that the translator here has done it. So this is Kunut talking with Hiruko. I was really surprised, this is at the top, when I saw you on TV today. That was a live broadcast, wasn't it? Yes. In your country, live program without incident. Your country fearless when guests suddenly sounds anti-democratic. Your country with such incident naturally can deal. I'm just going to pause there. So this is how Panska is going to look throughout this book. It's going to be all lowercase, and the grammar is going to be all over the place. But it's, this is a English translation of what Yoko Tawada / Hiruko's made-up language sounds like. I would be so curious. I'm going to Japan tomorrow, actually. And one of my goals is to go to a Japanese bookstore and pick up a Japanese copy of this book and kind of compare it so that I can see what this looked like in Japanese. But here is Kunut's perspective about her Panska. Hiruko was sometimes hard to follow, but when I stopped to think, it seemed like maybe that was because I just wasn't very bright. Not that I think I'm particularly stupid, but after I smoke pot, I'll suddenly go all foggy in the head for days afterward. Like there's this idea right in front of me, but my brain's too sluggish to grasp it, that sort of frustration. I couldn't tell whether the strangeness I felt listening to Hiruko was because of the dope or thanks to this entirely new kind of grammar she was using. But any sort of distance between us was purely due to language. On a personal level, I felt as I had known her since we were children. Are you living in Copenhagen? No, in Odense. But today's single room reserved, so at wristwatch looking unnecessary. Well then, can I take you to dinner? As a budding linguist, there are lots of things I want to talk to you about. To most people, linguist, not interesting job. To me, linguist equals diamond. Hearing her say that made me so happy my heart did a backflip. So that's kind of their immediate introduction to each other, and their immediate kind of Kunut's attraction to her is through their shared love of language. On the next page, on page 13, he goes on to kind of observe this made-up language, and Hiruko responds, not perfect, my present situation equal to language itself. After 1 month, less like Norwegian, more like Danish possible. So we're starting to get kind of the rules of this made-up language. It's not always the same. She can kind of switch it up. She's the only one who can speak this. And, it's just so intriguing to connect. Page 14. And all this time, you haven't spoken your mother tongue at all? The very first mention of mother tongue in this book, page 14. And mother tongue is a concept that Yoko Tawada will play around with throughout this book. She will also, one thing to mention, there's a lot of wordplay in this book. So anyone who's interested in that kind of like puns or language or linguistics, this is just such a delicious book. you know, if you think about it, mother tongue, why is it mother tongue and not father tongue? You know, and there's a lot of these characters out of the 6 who have such complicated relationships with their mothers. And that's another way that Yoko Tawada is really playing with that concept of mother tongue and what that means and why we place so much importance on that. Okay, continuing with the excerpt. Mother tongue people not easy to meet. Where all are, I know not. Little by little planning to look for. How are you going to look for them? After broadcast, many emails and phone calls came. So many places to look. Oh, so I wasn't the only one who called. I'm kind of disappointed to hear that. Tomorrow in Trier, Umami Festival held. Umami from my mother tongue originated. Going there, some mother tongue person might meet. Can I go with you? I'm interested in language from countries that have disappeared. Page 14, this is still the very beginning, and we already have a plan. These 2 people are going to go to Trier, even though they just met. A little bit later on, page 15, they have a really funny interaction about Moomin. For those who have traveled to Japan, you might notice Moomin is really, really popular, even though it's a Scandinavian, it's a Finnish, I believe. I have a Moomin right here, so you can see what a Moomin is. This is Moomin in the comment. He's like a very beloved character. And for whatever reason, it got really popular in Japan. And so they have this really funny interaction about Moomin and which culture it belongs to. Oh, someone mentioned, yes, Peyton. I live close to Fukuoka, and there was a big Moomin cafe. Yes, yes. So, you know, throughout this book, there's going to be a lot of those kind of observations about cultural objects or images that have kind of transcended borders. And Moomin is one of them, sushi is one of them. All right, we're going to skip forward a little bit. Page 26, we're in another chapter now that's from Hiroko's perspective. And you'll notice the writing is more traditional. It's not all lowercase. And when you are in her head, it kind of looks like this in the first person. And depending on the language she's speaking, the format's going to look a little different. I feel like everybody's tired of hearing my voice, and I like to do this sometimes in my classes where I have somebody else read out loud for me, and also to give you a chance to kind of like speak out loud. So can I have maybe one volunteer here to read this excerpt out loud? I'll tell you exactly where to start and stop. Anybody who's capable.
I'll read for you, Yurina, if you tell me.
Thank you, Ginger. All right. So here I wanted to discuss on page 26, where I have it up, from the place I have underlined. I got the idea of.
Okay, I got the idea of trying to teach my homemade language to immigrant children. It's an artificial language that can be understood throughout Scandinavia, which I privately call Panska. I stuck the ska of Scandinavia on the N of Pan, which means universal. There's a kind of ethnic folk dance in Sweden called the polska, which sounds like it should be from Poland, though it's actually Scandinavian in origin. I'm hoping my name for this language I've invented has the same sort of strangeness. Panska was not made in a laboratory or by a computer. It's a language that just sort of came into being as I said things that people somehow understood. Comprehensibility is what's most important. So with that as my standard, I talked as much as I could every day. This was my great discovery, that the human brain has a language creating function. You don't have to pick out one language to study and learn from textbooks. If you just listen carefully to the people around you, picking out sounds, repeating them, feeling the patterns of the language as a rhythm that reverberates through your body while you're speaking, eventually they'll turn into a new language.
Just a little bit more, yeah.
Okay. I may need to move the screen up a little bit.
Oh, yes. From a long time ago. Can you see the bottom part? Yeah.
I can see just the 2 lines though there.
There.
Okay. Yeah, a long time ago, most immigrants headed for one specific country and stayed there until they died. So they only had to learn the language spoken there. Now, when people are always on the move, our language becomes a mixture of all the scenes we've passed through on the way.
Okay, we can stop there. I'd love to open it up to the room now, especially because I know that through JAST, we have a lot of people here who you know, are studying Japanese or are already bilingual, or perhaps even know more languages, or maybe you're Japanese studying English. I'm just really curious to hear your thoughts on this description of Panska and her point about kind of language and comprehensibility is what's the most important, that kind of thing. Like I'd love to hear did this resonate with anybody, or was there a line or two from this excerpt that stood out for you?
I could go first if that's okay.
Yeah.
So I guess like a little story before I went to Japan, like my study was very textbook heavy. So when I moved to Japan to work as a teacher, I did struggle a little bit. And I kind of resonated with that part where it said, you know, if you just listen carefully to the people around you, you know, picking out sounds and kind of learning the pattern of the language and everyday conversations, like that can be a very good and more effective learning tool. And I came to, you know, I feel like experience that in my own studies while living over in Japan. And kind of, you know, like I guess when I was studying it, trying to like not focus so much on like grammar rules, I guess, but then does this like flow properly, if that makes sense?
Yes, it makes total sense. Did that resonate with anyone else in the room?
I can talk my experience.
Yes, please.
You know, we like to categorize Japanese or English, but I experience it more personal. When I meet people, they have more hard time understanding my English, but all my friends have much easier time to understand me because they're being around with me and they understand how I talk and how my brain process. So yeah, it reminded me my best friend said, and my name is Nozomi, and she said, I speak Nozomi English. That she said.
I love that.
That reminded me.
And that sounds like a sign of a really good friend too, someone who can kind of understand that about you, but also about just how language works. Anyone else?
So I can talk. I like the part that says our language becomes a mixture of all the scenes we pass through on the way. And yeah, like I grew up in Japan. I read this book in Japanese, so this is my first time seeing it in English, but it's kind of cool. But yeah, I think I work in New York now, so like there are many things that I can say in English, but I would probably struggle in Japanese. But I think, you know, if you're bilingual or bicultural, you know, like depending on the scene, like which you have the language that comes first. So I thought this was a good description of that.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I love that, you know, from the 3 people who spoke just now, that we got the perspectives of like people kind of you know, going from one language to another, either way, whether it's from English to Japan or Japanese to English, or like Mari living kind of like in between that, in a very like, I immediately thought of you, Mari, when I read this book, and I'm so glad that you read it too.
I really like this. Thanks for recommending.
Yeah. And I'm interested later to perhaps hear your thoughts on the, you know, the translation, because I have not read the original Japanese. So yeah, I'm going to move on a little bit to the second thing I wanted to share, which was about some of these other characters. But before we move on, I just wanted to make a quick point about Panska, which is that this is a really significant thing to see in a literary work, at least for someone like me. And I don't know that this has really been explored in fiction, at least like this, like in any other book. And like we heard from those who spoke just now, it really resonates with a very particular experience of someone kind of going from one language to another. And Yoko Tawada is someone who, because of her life experiences traveling to so many different places in Europe and trying to become fluent in many of those languages, she really understands that struggle, but also kind of the joys that come with it. And she just has so much fun with languages and with words, and you just see that in the writing. And so it gives me a lot of hope for a future that can be more tolerant, you know, of people who aren't just of one category or another in language, but someone who might just kind of be exploring a lot at the same time. And Nozomi, the thing that you said about your friend really struck with me, because in this book, you know, Hiruko is really accepted by all of the other characters. Let me just share the character list here. Like everybody here, all the 6 people, they are here to like help her. And, you know, they're drawn to her, not just because she's interesting and from Japan, but there's also something else about her that she's friendly, she's interesting, she's smart, like she's a little funny, and they're drawn to her for her, and they're helping her for her. And they continue to kind of learn from each other and travel together. It's just such a beautiful kind of setup. All right, that's enough of Hanska. But any other sort of, does anybody have a burning comment or question before we move on?
I have something I'd like to say.
Yeah.
I'm a student of the Japanese language, and sometimes I can't say what I feel in English. And one of my tutors will give me something to say in Japanese, and the meaning is closer to what I'm feeling than my own words. So that's happened a couple of times.
Wow, that's really beautiful, actually. I love that. And you know what? I'm going to use that as a springboard for the next excerpt that we're going to look at, because I want to kind of talk about the mother tongue and the native tongue and kind of the assumptions and the importance we place on that. And Yoko Tawada, I think, throughout this book is trying to make a case, a very unique case against the mother tongue. And is this saying exactly what you just said, Heather, about how sometimes learning a second language can open up sort of more authenticity. So, you know, I'm just going to scrap some of my plans. We're going to skip forward a little bit, especially I'm also looking at the clock. So we're going to skip forward a lot, but that's okay, because I think we're entering a really interesting territory with this group. So we're going to skip forward to, I want to look at this excerpt on page 119. A lot has happened, but all you need to know, let me see if I can find it here. 119, there it is. Okay, 119. All I need to know is, all you need to know. So this is before Hiruko meets Tenzo. So remember this character list. Hiruko and Kunet and Akash are on their way to Trier to try to meet Tenzo, but he's not there. So then they all travel to Norway. And so this is in Norway. And this is right before Hiruko meets him. I'll just read this really quick because it's short. So this is from Hiruko's perspective, page 19. When he came, I would be able to speak my native language for the first time in years. After all, that was the purpose of this trip. My past was now much too far away to reach out and touch. But soon, someone would be standing in front of me who would understand my native language, the one I used to breathe in along with the air that filled my lungs, that would go down my gullet along with the sweet and sour taste of soy sauce and meating, and seep into the cotton lining of my stomach, and then slip into my veins to be carried in a constant stream up to my brain. When I talked to Tenzo, even for a few minutes, all the countless threads that connected us would show themselves. Those threads were words. So this is Hiruko's anticipation of what it's going to be like to finally be able to speak this language with another person. And I know I've given it away, but Tenzo is not quite who we think he is. And let's see. I want to show you what happens after they meet. This is going to be on page 188. And maybe, you know what, Heather, can I just call on you to read this? Because I think it's going to resonate, especially with you. Let's see. Heather, would you mind reading here? 188, I have it shared here from Suddenly I Remembered.
Suddenly I remembered Nanook the Eskimo. His pronunciation was so fresh and new. I remembered his way of saying, ha ji me mashite, how the ha stuck in the air, how hot the G sounded, more like Jew, and then how after that strong ma, shite, had slipped out all at once like going down a slide. I seemed to be hearing every word he said for the first time. When I found out we didn't share a mother tongue, I wasn't disappointed in the least. In fact, the whole idea of a mother tongue no longer seemed to matter. This meeting between two unique speaking beings was far more important.
Thank you, Heather. So this is an interesting case because Hiroko meets Tenzo/Nanook, finds out that he's not a native speaker, but he's trying so hard. And he also, you know, in his sections, if you read the book, you will see that he actually does have a passion for Japanese, and that he does kind of like what Heather was saying, like something about the language feels really true to who he is, and that it allows him to express himself in a way that the other languages he speaks does not. And Hiroko notices that, right? Like she's noticing that in him, even if it's not fluent, even if it's not his mother tongue. And this is towards the end of the book, 188. But even before that, sorry, I'm like kind of like skipping back and forth, but I want to show you what Canuck says, you know, from the linguistics perspective of the mother tongue. So page 148. Can I have another volunteer read this excerpt here from I'd Had My Own Doubts?
I can read for you if you like.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay. You said
From
my own doubts?
Yes.
Okay. I've had my own doubts about the word native for some time now. Some people assume that the language of a native speaker is perfectly fused with her soul. And some still believe your native language is wired into your brain from the time you're born. Of course, that's a myth. You can't even dress up in the invisibility cloak of science anymore. There are people who think everything native speakers say must be grammatically correct when all they're doing is faithfully copying the way most of the people around them talk, which isn't necessarily correct usage. Still, others say a native has a better vocabulary, but most native speakers are too busy to think much about language and tend to use the same words and phrases all the time, whereas non-natives who move back and forth between two languages are always looking for new words and expressions. So who's more likely to have a bigger vocabulary?
Thank you so much for reading. I'm going to pause there. So with those two excerpts kind of in mind, these arguments about the native tongue, these realizations about the native tongue, I'm again curious to hear all of your thoughts on what this might mean for you, and if any of this resonates with you.
Hi, Yurina. I just wanted to react to that. As you know, I was born and raised in Japan, and Japanese is not my first language. But when I moved to the US when I was 18, I remember dreaming, that is when I was asleep, dreaming in Japanese all the time. And then probably a couple of years after I moved here, I suddenly had a dream, and I was dreaming in English. And I woke up and I remember that moment very clearly, and thinking that it was almost like I felt guilty, like I had abandoned my Japaneseness. And it was very, very, at least for me, intertwined with the fact that I had dreamt in English finally. And I have not read this book, but just hearing the two excerpts that you've chosen, I see, I guess, a journey and a realization on the main character's part. of what, you know, mother tongue and native language might mean, and how maybe like I had experienced so many years ago, this, I don't know what the word is in English, kodawari, about how important the native tongue might be, may have changed within the character's mind throughout the novel. I'm not sure, I'm just guessing. But I had a similar journey, I think, for me, and this obsession about native language and mother tongue and authentic Japanese and, you know, everything like that. And how, as I've lived longer here and as my identity has changed, and I'd like to say progressed a little bit, I've gone away from that some. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, it makes total sense. Thank you so much for sharing, Masami. Any other responses or thoughts to that?
I can share again.
Yes, please.
So it says the more bigger vocabulary, but I think it's also like big personality, like which language I'm using, depending on that, I feel my personality change, or the way to see, to approach things change. Like exactly same situation. If you are using Japanese, you would say sumimasen, you know, I'm sorry. But if you're using in English, you would say thank you. So that kind of difference is like which language you are choosing really change the way you prospect the event that I've been feeling.
Yes, this idea that in both of what you're saying, I feel like there's a lot of, I think, you know, just like Hiroko and these characters are noticing the kind of, you know, importance or sacredness that we, you know, apply to one person's mother tongue, which really is kind of out of our control, right? We're so little when that is ascribed to us that by the time that we're fluent in a language, we don't really have a choice in that. We just are. And then maybe you learn another language and you're more aware and it's more of a deliberate choice. And maybe by choosing a second language yourself, instead of something that's ascribed to you, that does become something more authentic because you're the one choosing it. And once you become fluent, or once you're learning a second language, just like, you know, these characters and what you all just said, the language opens up a portal into new ways of understanding, of being, of interacting with people. I love that little anecdote about I'm sorry in Japanese as thank you in English. Like, it's by learning the two languages that those portals kind of open, and you get to be different people depending on the different languages, or, you know, and the joy, right, that comes with learning a new language, or, and the guilt of maybe leaving one for another. All of these are just such real feelings that I think so many people around the world are experiencing, but are not, I don't think until this book has ever really been explored to this degree. And oh, thank you so much, Masami, and for being here and for sharing your thoughts. Yeah, we'll wrap up in just a few minutes, but yeah, I just wanted to, I'm sorry I couldn't get to share even more. I was planning on sharing like 5 more excerpts, but you know, too ambitious of me. I'm actually glad that we got to kind of slow down and talk about just a couple of these key points, because I'm realizing too, being in this virtual room and hearing some of you speak, that, you know, that I'm not alone in this. And this book is something that allowed me to feel that. And I'm really hoping that that can be a shared feeling with all of us. In the remaining minutes, I do want to open it up for any other questions or thoughts that you had about any of the excerpts, or from anything that anybody just said in this room. This is your opportunity to speak.
I just wanted to share. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I just keep thinking about, and obviously I've only heard these excerpts, but I grew up going to like Japanese Saturday school and going back and forth with my mom to Japan, and but being able to speak both Japanese and English, and then in the US spending a lot of time with other like expat kids and also kids who are also half Japanese like I am and learning the language. You like get to, you're constantly speaking at the intersection of English and Japanese. And I don't know, there is a certain connection you have with those people, even if you meet as adults now, even if you didn't grow up with those people, when you do speak both languages, kind of can understand each other at that intersection. And if I don't have a word that if I don't have a word in Japanese to explain something, I can go through it in English and they'll understand, and vice versa. So yeah, I just think whenever I meet somebody that can speak both, or even if I studied in Tokyo for a little bit and had a lot of friends from other countries there, but they're, they have that same interest in Japanese and learning Japanese. And so, really even communicating with like 4 different languages, so I don't know, it's just interesting when you meet those people and they have that, like you said, like that international mindset and openness to understanding when you might not have the words to explain what you're feeling. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Annika. And I feel like, just like you said, when you get a group of international people together, and even if the languages aren't quite fluent between the group, there's this kind of shared empathy, right? Because everybody is there for a reason. They're there to learn. And they're there because they want to meet other people kind of like them, and like other weirdos, right? And that's exactly what the 6 people in this book are kind of like. They're all, they all find themselves in places that are not necessarily their home, but it's because they're yearning for something that's outside of those borders. And they also, by being outside of that border, want to meet other people who are outside of their borders. And something really magical happens when international people meet other international people. Or, and I'm sure like a lot of people in this room can kind of understand this just on your personal experience level. But yeah, this book really does a great job of portraying that special relationship, and even kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of languages and the misunderstandings that can happen, the humor that can happen, the inside jokes that are created. Like you'll laugh, you'll cry, it'll resonate. And yeah, I adore this book. And like I said, I could talk hours and hours on this, but our time is coming to an end. I really hope that you all enjoyed kind of like exploring some of these excerpts with me. And if you do, if you did find parts of this, that were appealing, like please, I really urge you to read the whole thing. And once you do, please feel free to reach out, and I'll be here to discuss with you more. But I'll continue to do these reading between the lines with JAST. I believe that the next one will be sometime in the fall. I don't know. Ginger and I will work that out in the coming months, but we'll keep this going. I haven't chosen my next book yet, but I have a whole stack that I could choose from. If anybody also has suggestions, feel free to reach out. I'll also put in my email address in the chats here so that you can do that. I also have a website with a contact page that you can find pretty easily just by Googling my name. But our time is up now. So thank you all so much for signing up, showing up, and going along this journey with me. And it was really nice to see some of your, some familiar faces and some new faces. If you're in Nashville, I look forward to meeting you in person one of these days. And yeah, let's keep this going, and have a great rest of your night and week, and hope to see you again in this space the next time.